So the project was pretty simple. We had 6 military installations in 7 days. We traveled over 1,800 miles just to see what was left when the government packs up its bags and leaves. So here we are at the original Earthworks Battery. This was constructed under President Lincoln due to a rising concern in Confederate sea raiders, essentially pirates. Okay, so here we are at Battery Pratt. This is the support system to the main battery, which is the West Battery of Fort Stevens. Now this battery actually had 2 6-inch rifles atop. Now the ammunition being too heavy had to be loaded through this conveyor system right here, which loaded the shells up to the soldiers above. So here are the gun turrets, or essentially what's left of the gun turrets. This is actually the main battery for Fort Stevens, pretty much the main hub of the entire fort, which actually consisted of 3 separate batteries. We have the Lewis Battery, the Walker Battery, and the Mishler Battery. And over on the left here we have the Parados, which is actually a back defense for the entire West Battery. Unlike the people operating the West Battery, who were actually completely out in the open, this allowed the gunmen in the lookout towers to effectively control the Columbia. So this is Battery Russell. Battery Russell is actually a really unique part of Fort Stevens. This is the only United States base on US soil during World War II to ever come under attack. So the story goes that an I-25 Japanese submarine off the coast of Fort Stevens had actually fired 17 shells. And so they say one of the shells actually came right over the fort. So you can picture sitting here, imagine a shell fired coming right over. So Fort Stevens and the surrounding 3,700 acres were added to the National Registry of Historic Places in September of 1971. Now what sets this apart from a lot of other military installations is the fact that even after the shutdown of the fort, they decided to upkeep the premises, unlike our next location.
More coastal defense, but it was completely hidden. Unlike Fort Stevens is out in the open. I mean, you can see Fort Stevens when you're coming up to the Columbia. Probably a boring job to sit there all day, down in a bunker in the middle of nowhere, but you know, dark, musty, but it's really interesting actually that guys had the patience to do that.
So we're gonna go down in the bunker here and see what it's all about. Break out the old headgear. I did wrestle, so that's kind of familiar, except they didn't have cameras on them. So after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, a lot of bunkers like this one were actually constructed because we were trying to build a defense on the West Coast as people were becoming increasingly nervous and scared of foreign attack. These bunkers had to be extremely well ventilated because you're spending most of your time underground in the Pacific Northwest in a rainforest. The fear and the anxiety and the, you know, you're waiting. You're waiting. So here I am standing atop the ventilation system to the bunker. And as you can see, it's completely secluded. I mean, you would never know this bunker is here unless you basically stumbled upon it. So we're now going to take you 360 miles from the Oregon coast to a place called Burns, Oregon. This is the location of an Air Force station. This place is completely abandoned, but first we're going to stop off in Sisters, Oregon to get a little perspective.
With the advent of supersonic jet aircraft, it became apparent that the manual air defense system, so long in use against the threat from slower planes, could no longer provide adequate protection. The vast network of radars, constantly pouring information into the manual control centers, would need mechanical help if the threat from mass raids was to be met.
And never thinking too much about it, I knew about where it was, and we went back maybe a year later, and I said, I think I'm going to go visit that site. I think we all like to revisit home, but be prepared of what you're going to find. Things change. When you're gone, the world keeps moving on.
The 634th Radar Squadron provided information 24/7 to the SAGE Direction Center, where it was analyzed to determine range, direction, altitude, speed, and whether or not the aircraft were friendly or hostile.
But that radar site, to many of the guys, was home, as all of my radar sites were home.
So in 2002, the federal government had actually brought in a concrete crusher. What they wanted to do was remove all the metal, the copper, and the petroleum products. The wooden structures were all just chewed up. I doubt that they were burned. They were just probably destroyed, and what's left is just these concrete foundations.
If you're an old radar guy, it's a little bit like looking at a skeleton on the ground, a one-dimensional skeleton. I know it sounds a little weird, but there was some voices in the air, and I could hear these voices laughing, chuckling. I could almost envision them walking across the compound. I saw the air policeman at the gate.
Of course, the gate shack is gone. And it's almost like you can feel what the daily routine was like around here. So there's something really eerie on this bluff. You have a 360-degree view.
It was a magical time to revisit a home all by myself.
It's like a persisting memory long past its time. It's hard to believe how few people know that this base is still here.
We who worked there, we did our job, and if they said, well, the site's closing up next Thursday, you just took that as part of your job. Some radar sites have been really scraped off the face of the earth.
And at some sites, the only remaining thing is a small bronze plaque.
Not unlike a gravestone. Because when you're gone, you're gone.
And you never know what's over the next horizon. So we're coming up on Christmas Valley Air Force Base. This place is absolutely in the middle of nowhere. So Christmas Valley maybe opened in 1985. They built this base as they were closing radar stations all over the country. Seeing 3 buildings very far apart. So even though we closed the base in 1997, the technology is actually still quite relevant. Whereas traditional radar is line to sight, over-the-horizon radar, it bounces off the ionosphere and back to Earth for long-distance radar detection. They're mostly skeleton power stations. So over-the-horizon radar requires massive amounts of electricity. We couldn't get into any of the buildings, but we felt it was important to include this piece. So here we are in 2015, and Iran has actually installed their own over-the-horizon radar system. So Christmas Valley is in cold storage, packed away and largely untouched.
It's as if the sleeping giant of the Cold War is very much awake in Iran, along with all too familiar political tensions.
Which makes you wonder, is history repeating itself? I'm standing at one of the few remaining buildings left of Camp ADAIR. I mean, this property was 55,000 acres, 1,800 buildings. Basically, the military moved into the area and gave everyone that lived here about 3 hours to leave. The construction of Camp ADAIR began. Now, they began building dozens of roads just like this one. So we're now standing in the smokestack, which is actually on the Santiam Christian School property, which is part of Camp ADAIR. Now, the camp was actually turned into an Air Force base in 1957, so the school used a lot of the buildings that were actually part of the Air Force base as well as Camp ADAIR. So here we are at the Officers Village. This is pretty much the hub of what's left. In 1957, after World War II, it was actually converted into an Air Force base. And later, in 1979, they converted it into the Santiam Christian School.
From August of '44 until about July of '46, Camp ADAIR was also used as a POW camp for German and Italian prisoners of war. So when we got to Condon Air Force Base, there was actually 2 gentlemen. Now, they didn't want to be on camera themselves, but they were totally okay with letting us in to explore the property a little bit and give us a little background on everything.
A lot of the farmers around here really enjoyed it because they had extra help in the summertime, and they'd hire these guys to drive truck and do whatever on the farm, so they had a good, ready source of income. And the guys that stayed here, they loved it because they had extra money coming in. Probably, what, 20 of them here that live here now?
And still to this day, about every other year, they get together for a reunion.
Well, yeah, they quit doing maintenance on it in '68. You know, it hasn't been touched since then.
And it changed hands, I think, four
Four
or five
times.
times.
Yeah.
They basically strip it of all that it's worth, and then they default and let the county take over until it's auctioned off again.
County auctions it off for back taxes. I think the last time the whole base sold for $50,000.
So we managed to arrive during the demolition of the first building, the mess hall. It's kind of an amazing place. It's sat here untouched since the 1970s. They said the broken windows only occurred in the last few years, with a handful of kids throwing some rocks and things. From the Oregon coast to the high desert, we really discovered a lot on this trip, but we barely scratched the surface of the rich history of Oregon's military installations. So thanks for watching this episode of Phantom Bases. This series is made possible with the support of people like you. So please visit us at USAMM Studios on Facebook and YouTube and tell all your friends.